Hi again. So, if you watched my other video, you know that I read a lot of books. I actually do have some of my children's books that I've put on YouTube, reading them out under a different channel called Mama Lois Reads. That channel is really not taken off anywhere. I kind of did it mostly for my kids because I started writing for my kids. Years ago, when my boys were tiny, this big bin of books. This isn't even all the books that I wrote. I don't have copies of a lot of my newer ones because I can't afford to buy copies of everything that I've published, because currently I have 504 titles. And then a lot of the books that I do for other people, I don't have copies of because I gave those copies to the people that I did the books for. Like I wrote books for my nieces and nephews and some of my kids' friends and one of my neighbors. And whenever I do that, I usually only order one copy and then I give it to them. But originally I started writing because my older kids, were not interested in being read to. And I was trying to teach them how to read, and I felt like I was failing because they were not interested in reading at all. So I started writing stories with them as the characters. And then somebody hooked me up with a publisher who ended up screwing me over really bad. She sold my books, sold my characters, and never paid me any royalties. I actually, at one point, threatened to sue her, and then she stopped selling my books. But, at one time, my first few books were actually in Target. This publisher had them in Target and Barnes & Noble, but I never got a penny from it at all. In fact, she charged me $700 to publish the book. I had 3 books at the time. She charged me $700 per book, and I was supposed to go to her office and print and bind the books myself, which I did. And I was like, hey, if I'm doing all the work, why am I paying you to do this? I thought I was paying you to publish this, and I'm doing all the work. And then she gave me some sort of story. She said, oh, well, I can't keep the lights on, and so I have to charge. And I was like, I didn't know anything about the publishing world at the time, and I just felt like it was weird. But that was what happened with my first 3 books. I did republish them eventually, after I managed to get the rights back to my books. But before I was able to republish them, I found another publisher that also turned out to be a scam. I went through Publish America, which I don't think it exists anymore, to publish my 3rd book called Fuzzy Bacon. I'm looking for the newer copies of some of my original books. Here's one of them. It was called God's Kids, and I was very very into church culture at the time. So my first few books were all were very along that line, talking about morals and spirituality and stuff like that. And it was very family oriented, and you can see this character was based off my oldest and my second one, Dylan and Robert. The first time these were published was, let's see, Dylan was 2 years old and Robbie was a newborn, he was a couple months old. So Robbie's turning 20 next week. So my characters were 20 years old. It's kind of funny because there is a certain famous character that looks very similar to this in their first videos. And it's weird. My character came first. I can prove that. But it doesn't matter because their stories are completely different than mine anyway, and whatever. My stories were all based around my kids. And that's how I taught my kids how to read. My, I don't, it's got to be in here somewhere if I have a copy of it still, called Fuzzy Bacon. It was the one that I published through Publish America originally. I don't have the original copy of that anymore, but I did republish it after 7 years. I was able to get the rights to my characters back. That was another one that one I only had to pay $40 to have my book published, but they got the rights to my characters for 7 years. And I wasn't allowed to publish through any other publisher at that time, and it was just a disaster. So then when Amazon started their self-publishing service, I was all up in that because I was not going to trust another publisher with my intellectual property ever again. So, anyway, for a long time I kept writing stories about my kids and stories for my kids, and I would just make them on paper, and I had them in like flip books, but I didn't have a way to publish them until Amazon self-publishing came out. And then this story was the first one I did on Amazon, although originally it was in a different format. It was like 6x9, and this was a story based on a dream that Robbie had, where he dreamed that a princess would come through his window every night and they would go on adventures in the land of Manitouri. And so I wrote down his dream and I turned it into a book form. And that started a whole world of adventure where my kids and I would come up with stories based on games that we played or ideas that they had. This one, Dripping Soup, is one of my best sellers. My sister actually used it in her classroom when she was a teacher. And for a while, it was in a couple of schools in Wisconsin as part of their curriculum. And it's called Dripping Soup. And this was actually a game that my oldest two came up with, where they pretended to be potatoes or vegetables, and I was the chef, and the couch was the soup pot, and I would set them on the couch and then fall asleep, and they would sneak off the couch, and I'd go, "Oh no, potatoes, get back in your soup pot," and I would chase them and tickle them and like use my hands like this, like I was pretending to chop up their legs, and get back in the soup pot. I turned it into a storybook. Where the potatoes and the carrots and stuff, they jump out of the pot. As soon as the vegetables were certain that the chef was asleep, the potatoes made their first move. They peeked over the side of the pot and winked at each other, and then peek, plink, plop, splat, they jumped right out of the pot. The chef chases them around, catches them, puts them back in the pot. They keep jumping out. Then he wakes up. His soup is done. It's a whole thing. Coffee for Supermom. This is based on how the kids say that coffee gives me superpowers. But each of the kids have come up with different characters over the years. Like Taylor's was Pinkalina. She loved pink, so she was Pinkalina. And we built this whole pink world around her character. Robbie had a bunch of different characters. There was Bertro the spider, and there was the Robo Spider, there was Super Robert. Ronan's characters were mostly hedgehogs. Corbin had a shark and a ninja. Braytech also had a ninja character and a jetpack dog. Ellie, Theo, and Naomi, their characters were themselves in various roles. Like Ellie was Super Bean Bean, who shot jelly beans out of her hands, and Theo's was Screamador, who could screech really loud and had a pet dinosaur. Naomi's was Curly Hair Girl. She used to have curly hair. Her hair is more wavy and straight now. She used to have curly hair, and she said that she had magic hair. So we wrote these stories about magic hair and what does the magic hair do? And she's like, it defeats the evil moldy bread. And it was this whole storyline. And then there was other stories that, like Mama Otter Madama Otter's Day is Never Done. This is like about quintessential stay-at-home mom who's up with her kids all night long and trying to like do a work from home job and like basically me. At least before I started working outside the home. And then Puppy Spider. This was one of my sister's kids. Was like, can you make me a book about a puppy spider? The Curl. So this is actually based on a true story. Ellie had really, really straight hair, and she wanted curly hair, and she cried, and she started praying every night that she would get curly hair. And now it started with one curl in the back of her hair, and it was like curled up really tightly, and like her hair became curly. She has straight hair in the front, and in the back it's curly, like Ronan's. Plastic Wrap. This one was about something Taylor used to do. One day she was outside playing on our deck. Our deck is fenced in so the kids can play out there while I'm doing other things, and she got a hold of plastic wrap and she wrapped every rock and flower and everything that she could get her little hands on in plastic wrap. She was like 6 years old at the time, and so I wrote a story about it. This is one of Braytek's first books, the Jetpack Ninja. That's one of my comic books. I did books for cousins, nieces, nephews. The Insurmountable Laundry Pile. This is a very sarcastic book. Some of my books are more geared towards moms. This is about, you know, the never-ending laundry that moms have to deal with. Big Lug and Little Nugget. This was about Cupid and Biscuit, my dogs. Unfortunately, Cupid has since passed away. She had a brain tumor and we had to have her put down. She died a couple of months ago. But Cupid always wanted to be a mom. Unfortunately, she was spayed. She had gone into, so we got her in 2020, and we wanted to get her spayed right away, but we couldn't because of the shutdowns. And she ended up going into a false pregnancy, and she was just absolutely devastated. And we were able to get her spayed the next year, and then we got Biscuit. Biscuit was really tiny at the time, and she decided that was her puppy, and she suddenly started making milk even though she had already been spayed, and she nursed him for about 12 weeks, and that was her baby, and she always treated him like he was her baby. And when she developed the brain tumor, she tried to attack him, and so we had to put her down. It was really sad. Also, there's a few of my books where there's no writing in these. These are just some of my artwork. This is when I first got my tablet. It looks ridiculous. Ridiculous. I was just learning how to use my tablet. And just some like abstract art. I took pictures of some of my pencil art over the years. That's my niece. Oh, this was one of the first art pieces that I sold. I actually sold this one on eBay for a couple $100 years ago. I don't usually draw hyper-realism, especially not animals, but Rob had wanted me to draw a deer because deer are his favorite, and he wanted me to do animals. His mom does hyper-realism with animals, and he wanted me to do artwork like his mom. So I did, and I sold it and made some money, but I didn't like doing that artwork. That wasn't like my passion. This one is my brother, and I actually drew that when I was in high school. It's a kind of crappy picture of it. But this is a mix of more recent artwork, like from a couple of years ago, and artwork that I did like a long time ago. And like a mix of cartoons, and there's another deer one that I did that I sold. I also sold that one on eBay. Mix between like realism and symbolism and stuff. And this is from another book that I did, but the drawings that made it into the book were ones I did by hand, and then these ones were the same drawings that I did on my tablet. And I like the ones that I did by hand better, and those ones ended up in my book. But I think there's 6 of these books where I took pictures of my art and published it. And the reason I did that originally was because one of my husband's bosses at the job he used to have was really interested in my art, but I could not bear to part with the originals. So I put them into a book so she could have that. It's very rare that I part with my original work if it's a drawing of my kids. I did give my mom and dad some of the drawings that I have of my kids and some of the paintings, although it was really, really hard for me to part with that. Gosh, I have so many of them here. Doorbell is also based on a game that my kids and I played together. We had this playhouse and it used to have a working doorbell, and I would sit in the playhouse and pretend to be a dragon that was asleep in there, and they would ring the doorbell and I'd be like, "Who rang my doorbell?" And then I would chase them and like, "I'm gonna eat you up." And so that's based on that game. Here's another one with my artwork. There's some pictures of some paintings I did of my kids. I used to paint a lot when I was like in high school, but then I stopped painting because painting is really messy and the kids would get into the paint. So when I got back into painting, I wasn't super good at it. But there's some landscapes I did, ocean scene. And I used to have my walls all painted like paisleys and stuff. You might see some of that in like my older short videos. I used to film in here a lot when I had the paisleys on the wall, but a lot of those videos are gone now. Whenever I would draw my kids, like I didn't have a ton of time when the kids were little, so I would set out like 10 canvases and I would paint all 10 of them at once so that nobody felt left out. Or I would set out 10 papers and I would do all of them at once so that nobody felt left out. This one's a little odd. Now you can see like I actually got some of my books, I got copies of them before I hit the publish button. This one is a collection of dreams that I had. I started writing down my dreams and they got intense and weird. And I don't have as many dreams as I used to, or I just don't remember them. But during the time period from about 2017 until like 2023, 2024, yeah, pretty much until Toke died, I wasn't sleeping much. And when I did sleep, I would have these really, really intense dreams, but I was constantly getting woke up by the kids. And if you get woke up during a dream state, you remember it vividly. So I would write them down. And most of them were very apocalyptic. Which I now think was my brain trying to prepare me for losing my son, because that did feel like an apocalypse. I wrote a lot of stories about my feelings, like being abandoned by the people that I needed when I was going through stuff, like this one called I Needed You. And in the feelings one, I don't have copies of all the feelings ones, because just this year alone, I published almost 200 stories that I had. Some of them I had previously written, some of them I'd written recently. So I couldn't afford to buy copies of all of them. But the ones that are like this, with this, like, it almost looks like it's drawn in crayon, but I did it on my tablet. They were meant to deal with things like childhood trauma, feelings of abandonment, feelings like feeling hopeless, feeling like you're struggling, you know, concepts that can be very abstract. And so they're kids' books, but they're also meant for adults, because they deal with like some heavy topics. And then there's like these silly little ones like pie cats. Like this is one that Taylor came up with. And it's these cats that live by the beach and eat pies. She came up with the concept. This one was written for my niece. The first biographies I did of my kids, I made these because Amazon was easier to make scrapbooks than like something like Shutterfly or Snapfish was like so expensive to make photo books. So I did it through Amazon, and I didn't officially publish these ones until later on. But I printed them off so that I had copies. This one is a really goofy one. 2 years ago, he adopted our niece. She had spent a lot of time in foster care and homeless shelters in other states, and she just wanted to come home. When she was young, she lived down the street from us, and she was at my house like every day. So, you know, she was like, "You're like a mom to me. Can you adopt me?" So we did. And she wanted me to write stories for her, so I wrote this one. And this one is called Princess Freya Baby Cannon, where basically she has a dream where she gets pregnant, and she's pregnant with like 500 babies or something, and they just like shoot across the room, and it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Here's another one of my artwork. Another thing that I used to do is I used to hand make dolls for my kids. I really got into it for a while. Oh, this also has some of the paintings I did on my walls. See, I used to, now I have flowers on my walls, but I used to have like landscapes. And you'll see some of these in my short videos too. This one. This was an April Fool's Day prank. Several years ago, I painted that while my husband was at work. So from a certain angle, it looked like a cartoon version of him was sitting on the toilet, and it was so funny because like it was there for, I'd say about 2 years. It was on the wall, and sometimes in the night, especially going there and like for like a second, you'd think somebody was actually sitting on the toilet. Let's see. There's just some random patterns that I did. Some pencil drawings. Oh, some pour painting. I took pictures of the pour paints that I did. And I don't have the original paintings anymore, at least not most of them. Because then I used those paintings I used as backgrounds for when I would paint children for parents. I've done grief books. This one was for a girl that lost her baby. And so I took pictures of her when she was a child to draw from, and altered it a bit to bring in some of the father's features and stuff. This one was one I did for my friend in Australia. Unfortunately, her son also passed away a year and a half to 2 years before Tilk did. I don't remember exactly how long it was. But she was one of the first special needs moms I met online. And I actually looked her up because I saw her and her son on a documentary, and her son had the condition that we thought Tilk had, but then we ruled that was ruled out. He didn't have that condition, but we stayed connected for a long time. This isn't Fuzzy Bacon. This was one that I wrote years and years ago, but didn't publish until a couple years ago.
You still doing that?
Yeah, do you need me to pause it or something? Yeah, okay.